everybody. This is Jacqueline Pulverari for another wonderful edition of Criminal Justice Cafe. Today we have a special guest with us, Bob Lustig, who was a FBI agent for several years, and I'll let him tell a little bit about himself on that. As you know, we like to educate the community about criminal justice in every facet. So we have had criminal defense attorneys on, we've had probation officers on, correctional officers on, and now and many incarcerated people. Now we have an FBI agent. So I'm very excited about this. So Bob, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? It's been a while.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to see you again.
I have pleasure here. I mean, thank you for being on. I know you're really busy, but tell us about you, a little bio.
A little bio, okay. So, born and raised in New York, actually live in Sleepy Hollow, New York,
Yikes.
when I had this horseman.
Yikes.
Was a typical small town upbringing, became a small town hero, was an athlete growing up, was in all the papers, went to college, played sports in college, and my whole childhood, I had always wanted to be an FBI agent. My uncles were in law enforcement, and so was my father. He was actually a corrections officer, ironically. And I always wanted to go one step higher than they were. So I picked the FBI, and I was fortunate enough to get an appointment to the academy down in Quantico back in 1988. I served for 24 and a half years and retired. During my career, I was highly decorated, I guess you could say. I was Federal Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. I had won pretty much any award that national security gives out. I was actually a counterintelligence agent. I want to clear that up. I never worked criminal matters. So I didn't go and arrest people. I was a spy catcher.
Ooh.
And, it was really exciting. It was like being James Bond, only without the tuxedo or the good looks.
Yeah.
um, so I had 24 and a half years in New York, and my wife and I had two children, and our son was young, and he was starting to play Little League Baseball, and I wanted to coach him. So I took a transfer to a smaller office right before the end of my career. And in so doing, I was bored out of my mind. I had worked in Manhattan with the UN, and it was like the hubbub of all the spies from every country around the world. So I was always busy. I had great cases. I had recruited a lot of foreign intelligence agents. I was highly successful. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in an office where there were 7 other people. And there was nothing going on, no matter how hard we tried. So I was fortunate enough to open up an informant who was providing information on terrorism targets, and was successful. And we were writing up a lot of information. We were disseminating it to the CIA, NSA, the military intel, and I had worked with all of them, so I knew everybody, and we were starting to get some stuff going on. When the informant came to me one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to be indicted." So I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "The company that I have," he owned a security company, kind of like Blackwater, but a little bit different. And he said, "The contract that we had in Iraq is being scrutinized by the DOD." And sure
Okay,
enough,
so hang on one second. So let's clarify
sure.
what an informant is for people who
Okay,
are not aware, and
sure,
then what a
great.
DOD is.
Okay, so by informant, I mean it was an individual who was in a position to provide intelligence to the U.S. government. DOD is Department of Defense. It's the military branch that handles, in this case, handles like criminal matters, within military contracts.
Okay.
So that being said, the individual, the informant, came to me and said, I can't work with you guys anymore because I have to focus on this indictment. And he said, unless you can help me, get out of this, I can continue to work. Well, part of being an intelligence or counterintelligence agent is manipulation. So I led him to believe that I was going to be able to help him get out of his indictment so that he could continue to provide the US government with the intelligence that he had been giving us. Unfortunately, the government agency that was investigating him started to believe that I was actually going to try to get him off his indictment.
Oh, wow.
And they came up with a theory that it was due to bribery. He had offered me a job when I retired. And during some communications with a boyhood friend who also knew this individual, he had said that basically I was going to get a $200,000 salary, if I retired and this individual was still able to, not be in prison. So unfortunately, that led to an indictment, and it was conspiracy to obstruct justice, and honest services fraud, which basically is a charge that says I was a government employee and I was stepping outside my government boundary to provide myself with some kind of profit while using my government position. I was fighting the case because I know, this is something that I had done. I was doing my job. But because we were in the national security world, the FBI, the CIA, and all these people that I was working with kind of stepped back because they were worried that in the courtroom, I was going to be able to talk about what I had done for a living. And a lot of the stuff that we do in the intel world is not really what you would call kosher.
Right.
So based on that, we had a hearing where the judge was going to determine whether or not I was allowed to talk about my job as my defense. And the judge asked the prosecutor what they were going to do if she allowed it. And they said they were going to drop all charges. So in my head, I was going home.
Yeah.
At this time, I had already been down 17 months in a supermax out in Utah in solitary confinement.
Wow.
I didn't see anyone. I couldn't even touch mail that I got. It was up on a screen. They wouldn't let me have pictures or cards from my children.
Were
So
you in solitary confinement because of your position with the FBI? Because I mean,
yes,
you don't know how many people in that facility may have. I mean, I don't know if you charged anyone in that facility, but you have no idea.
right. So instead of just PC, protective custody, I was in like solitary confinement.
Yeah.
It was chains, bar between the legs, 1 hour every other day, 7-minute showers attached to your door, that kind of thing. So back to the courtroom where the government says they'll drop charges. In my head, the judge was of course going to let me talk about my job. And this was on a Thursday, and she said, we'll come back Monday and I'll make the ruling. On Monday, she came back and she basically ruled that everything in my head was the proper United States government, and I wasn't allowed to bring it out in the courtroom.
Wow. So you couldn't even defend yourself
No, I could not
using the
say,
very job that you were there for.
right. And I couldn't talk about other situations where I had manipulated other informants the same way I was doing with this gentleman. I couldn't talk about any of my experiences that showed that we always lived in the gray. We weren't black and white. We did things, without warrants. We did things, in different ways in criminal matters. All of that went out the window, and basically I had no defense.
Wow.
So, because I believed in the system, because I was part of the system, I changed my plea and I pled open, figuring, look, they know I didn't really do this. I'm going to go into the courtroom and I'm going to say, look, I'll plead guilty because I learned that that's what you do. If you go to trial,
Can't go to trial.
you get broken off.
Yeah.
Only in America
You get the trial tax.
can you get your time doubled because you're fighting for your right to trial.
Yes.
So I went in. I had already had at this point 23 months in, and I changed my plea to guilty. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life because I knew in my heart I was lying. The irony is you're not allowed to lie in court unless you can lie in favor of the prosecution.
Yeah.
And basically that's what I did.
Yeah.
So I threw myself on the mercy of the court and I was sentenced to 15 years. Ironically, the informant who had 72 count indictment got 13 months.
Wow. So wait, let me get this straight. You got 15 years incarceration on one count. How many counts?
Well, it was 7 counts, but a lot of the counts were like identical.
I think that for me, that's shocking because as you know, I go to a lot of sentencings and the sentencing disparities are shocking to me. I'll go to one sentencing where a woman will get 24 months. I'll go to another sentencing for a very similar situation, same point level, which we can get into later. The same point level may get 36 months or 42. There's
so arbitrary.
Consistency. Yeah, it's because judges can downward depart or they can usually keep it within the guidelines.
And the crazy thing is I was getting enhancements left and right. And at that time, I realized that I had picked a terrible lawyer and I ended up firing him because unbeknownst to me, because I was in solitary confinement, he was basically blackmailing my wife to continue to pay him.
Wow.
Even though he had CJA, which, for people that are listening, is when I can no longer afford an attorney, but I'm already halfway through my case, the government will pick up the bill of my private attorney.
Correct.
At federal defender rates, however. It's not like, some kind of a whirlwind gold mine.
Right.
So after my sentencing, I was out in Ohio for maybe 2 weeks. And then I was downgraded down to Danbury Low. And when I got off the bus, I was the only person on the bus in the transport. When I got off the bus, I met with the COs, the correctional officers that handle like internal investigations. As we know, they're SIS.
SIS.
And, they told me, look, don't tell people that you're an FBI agent. Don't tell people you work with the CIA. Keep to yourself. Don't let anybody know what you did. You don't have to tell anybody anything. You don't have to show any paperwork. And then they walked me across the compound that was locked down. And they took me to the dorm. They stuck the key in the door and they opened it up. And there was an inmate standing there. And he turned around and he said, "Hey, everybody, the FBI agent's here." And that's when I realized that the inmate.com
is insane.
And it travels much quicker than any telephone you could ever use.
Yeah. It
So,
truly is. So how was it for you with inmates that you're living with now for a very long time, knowing you're an FBI agent?
okay, so um, what people probably don't know is that in federal prison there's like a hierarchy, and there's in the men's prisons. I'm not sure if it's the same in the women's. There's certain people that aren't allowed certain places. So, for example, say the television room. Um, if you're a sex offender, if you're somebody who cooperated, or if you're a cop, you're not allowed in the television room. So,
So wait, what
but,
would happen if you entered the room?
well, I did enter the room, and I ended up in my first altercation with four guys when we went back to the shower. And I was fortunate enough that they had sent one of the younger guys to take care of business first. And he was easy enough to handle. And it must have looked intimidating because the other three said, hey, you know what? You can go in the TV room whenever you want. So the next day I was out in the yard, which is the recreation area. And all of a sudden, 20 members of a gang, well, the Bloods, started approaching me. And in my head, I said, oh boy, this is it. Because one of the individuals that I had handled was a member of their organization. I said, this is going to be it. You know, they're coming for me.
Yeah.
And
And
the
it's a
shock,
small prison. It's not a large, Danbury is
no,
not a large correctional institute.
no. So the shot caller, which is like the head of the gang within the facility, came up and he said, hey, you know, can I talk to you? And I was like, sure. And he said, hey, look, we don't want any trouble. Would you mind teaching us what you did to that guy? And I was like, what? No, I can't do that. I'll end up getting another charge. And then I went into the weight room, and I'm an avid weightlifter. And here's a funny anecdote. So I went into the weight room, and there was another gang utilizing the weight room. It was their hour. What I had learned was the weight room was broken down in hour segments for different groups. And I walked into the weight room, and it wasn't, you know, my time. I was brand spanking new. And a big guy with dreadlocks came over and he said, hey, what car do you ride in? And I was like, yeah, I don't, you know. And he's like, no, come on, man, what car do you
Black
ride?
Impala.
And I was like, a Chevy Tahoe? And they all started laughing. And then one guy stepped up and he's like, yo, that's the FBI guy. And I actually was allowed to work out with them when they saw how I worked out. And at the end of my time in Danbury, ironically, in my car, in my workout group, was a shot caller for the Latin Kings, the Bloods, and the Aryan Nation, and
Wow.
me. So
Wow.
believe it or not, and you know, I always tell people that I met some of the men were better men that I met while incarcerated than I knew in the FBI.
Yeah.
And they accepted me for who I am as a person. And they saw me helping other people. And I made sure that I let people know that I was humbled. My first job was cleaning the showers and the toilets because I wanted them to see, you know, hey, I'm not this, you know, stuck up FBI guy that you might have dealt with when you were arrested. Because, you know, 75% of the guys in Danbury were put there by the company I worked for.
Yeah.
And
How was that for you though? Because you were a high employee in the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and now you find yourself incarcerated in the very same institution that the Federal Bureau of Investigations put so many people in. That had to be surreal.
it was daunting. And the thing that was so shocking to me was the systemic racism. Although I grew up in a small town that used to be a factory town, and we were 50-50 mixed racially, I never realized what young black men go through when they go through the system. And I learned that the notion that you're innocent until proven guilty doesn't exist, that you're guilty until proven guilty, especially if you're in a minority race. Incarceration has become the norm for our minority communities. There's the statistic that 80% of all black women either have had a family member or know someone who's been incarcerated, to me, is unbelievable. And before I was incarcerated, I was a person who, although I wasn't racist, I was ignorant. And I was probably not as open-minded as I should have been. And my mind was opened up when I became inmate 919-12054 instead of Special Agent Robert Lustig.
Yeah.
The things that I saw, the sentences, the disparity, I would argue with the white collar guys who stole $35 million from grandma and grandpa's retirements, who had the nerve to talk down to like a street drug dealer. Because in my head, they were serving like a purpose in the sense that like people were coming to them for an item. Grandma and grandpa never woke up and said, do me a favor, steal my retirement so I can't send my grandchildren to college. And yet a lot of these white collar men were getting 18 months, 26 months, and young black men who were hit with ghost dope, which was also something I couldn't believe when I heard it. And for people that are listening, ghost dope is basically if I buy a nickel bag and you people out there buy a nickel bag, but Jacqueline here has 50 kilos and gets arrested and tells on us, we're all getting charged with her 50 kilos. And
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes. So that's called ghost dope. That's one of the ways you can get ghost dope.
So it's similar to in a white collar case, for an example, I may have gotten charged with 5 counts of something. I only actually was guilty of 1.
Right.
However, and I only pled to 1. I was getting incarcerated based on that whole amount, though.
Right.
So
that's exactly right.
whatever my partner was doing was still on mine, and it was, so I was getting sentenced on the, even though I only pled guilty to what I pled guilty to, I still was getting sentenced.
Yeah, like it didn't matter. It didn't matter that you pled guilty to 1 charge.
Yeah.
You were going to get nailed with everything else that went on.
Correct.
Even your co-defendants. In my case, I was enhanced 6 levels because the individual, when he was proffered, said, well, I had offered him a job for like $200,000. And although, it wasn't a bribe, I'm sure he realized that I had to stay out of prison for him to get it. So they hit me with a $200,000 enhancement. Even though I had never heard the amount, that was a conversation between the individual and my boyhood friend.
Right. So tell us, wait, what is proffer? I try and because I know a lot of times I've learned from having guests on, we assume our listeners know all this terminology, but they don't. And so explain a proffer.
Sure. So in a nutshell, somebody who proffers sits down with the prosecution and cooperates. They answer all the questions that they're asked and they provide any information they can on their co-defendant. So they rat, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. So based on that, they normally will get some kind of a lesser sentence. And so that's really what a proffer is. You go sit there and they take down your notes, they write it up, you sign it, and that's your
And are they
property.
getting time off their sentence for doing that?
Yes, yes, they that's what they do. And the irony in my case was, if I was going to get him off his charges, I would have had him proffer.
Hmm.
But they said I can't do that. And then they went ahead and had him proffer. So basically, the idea of, well, you're law enforcement, you can't help your informant get out of his charges just because he's helping you. And then they helped him get out of his charges because he
Quite
was helping them.
hypocritical.
Yeah.
Quite
So, and that's when I learned that pretty much the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to do whatever they can to win.
Yeah.
And that's why they hit you with multiple counts of the same thing. They broaden the spectrum. They love that conspiracy word. I mean,
Oh
cons-
yeah.
conspiracy is basically two or more individuals conspiring to do anything.
Hmm.
I mean, you could
Well,
put
so
anything.
many women get hung up and in trouble because of conspiracy. If they know their boyfriend is selling drugs, or they're with
Right,
their boyfriend while there's drugs in the car, and
right,
they actually get a longer sentence for conspiracy than they do
right.
for selling. And I didn't learn that until a couple of years ago, and that really shocked me as well.
Yeah, I mean the conspiracy category in the federal system, they can pretty much make it anything.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like
it's
you
the same as
said,
wire fraud, right? Wire fraud is anything.
yeah, yeah,
An
and
email is wire fraud.
and the worst is conspiracy to commit wire fraud, because
Yeah.
that's automatically like 20 years.
Yeah.
And what's that mean? Like I was going to use my cell phone? Like I thought about using my cell phone? I
Yeah.
mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Or I was going to send someone an email, or, yeah, it really is. And I'm curious, if you go back in time prior to this happening to you, when you heard an individual who committed a financial crime getting raided with 15 agents. For an example, I can use my case. I got raided by 12 FBI agents at my home while I was in the shower. And back then, what was your mindset on that scenario? I know it's hard because your attitude has changed so much. However, if you can think back then when you were involved, and you were.
Oh no, definitely, I understand. There were times when we would go into someone who was like working for a hostile intelligence service, and he would be considered like a sleeper agent, like in the movies. And we would go in, full bore, 15, 20 guys deep, and tear his house to shreds.
Yeah.
And one thing that people don't understand is that's an investigative technique, meaning if three of us show up, it doesn't seem that serious to you. But if 25 of us show up with cardboard boxes wearing plastic gloves, you're probably going to crap your pants.
I was going to ask you what the purpose was, because I had brought my office back to the house, and my kids went to school. It was me and my husband here, and we weren't neither. I didn't get arrested. They just were looking for files for my partner.
Right.
So they raided the house. They had a warrant. My husband left. I stayed, had coffee. I mean, they were very respectful afterward. Unfortunately, where they found me, it was an awkward situation. But afterward, they were quite respectful. They didn't take anything. They recorded. They copied my computers. But I thought, what is the purpose of sending 12 agents? So one of the agents said, well, this is the cleanest house we've raided in a while. And I got offended. I think, of course I cleaned my house. And, I didn't, at that time, I didn't know. And he said, no, I'm talking about drugs, guns. And I'm thinking, well, what do you think? And is that the mindset for the FBI, to always think that the person they're raiding would have drugs or guns in their house, no matter what the crime?
Well, the FBI, and as well as other law enforcement agencies, especially in the federal system, they're trained to not make any assumption based on the appearance of the individual. So, for example, you're a beautiful blonde woman. If somebody walks in, they're not going to think, you're going to be an axe murderer. But
Maybe I could be.
right, right, and so we
look at
were
Lori
trained,
Vallow.
right, we were trained not to look at you and think, psychologically, well, she's probably a stay-at-home mom or
Yeah, but that's the right way to be
right.
trained, in my opinion. You're not
It's
profiling.
a safety
But by the
issue.
time the FBI raids an individual's house, they already know who they are. They already know, they've investigated them already to a point. So they already know what their daily ins and outs are, their business, their so forth. So I would think at that point, it would be simply a scare tactic.
A lot of times it is for intimidation. Other times they'll use an evidence response team to do the search. So they're not really locked into the case per se. They're basically a team of agents that serve warrants and do these searches. So they may not know, okay, this person's probably not going to have this, or this person might have this. They might be armed and dangerous, So they're going to go into every search puckered up.
Right.
For my arrest, the neighbors said there were 30 U.S. Marshals in full SWAT gear, and they literally did a felony car stop on our Chevy Tahoe as my wife drove up our street, and they threw my wife and our two children into the driveway at machine gun point.
How old were your children?
7 and 9.
Oh my God.
And the 9-year-old graduates college in 2 weeks, and she's still, they're both still traumatized from that. My wife almost got arrested because someone stuck a gun in our son right in his face, and he swatted it away. And they went at him. The agent went at him. And now this was the Office of Inspector General. That's who arrested me with the U.S. Marshals. The sad thing was, when they came around the side of the house, I was planting tomato plants for my wife. And there were 8 of them, and they all had AR-15s or MP5s, and each one of them was screaming a different command.
So you had no idea this was coming down?
Well, I was indicted, so I knew. I had actually told my lawyer, I'll turn myself in. Right. I actually wanted to avoid that situation.
Right.
Because I didn't want anybody to get hurt. I didn't want anybody to be in a situation where an accident might occur or.
Yeah, you're a dad. You're a dad and a husband.
Right. And I found out later on my lawyer never told the prosecutor.
Wow. How did that feel, working in an organization for 24 years, and this very same organization that you gave your heart and soul to? Did any of your brothers in the FBI that you worked with even say, hey, Bob, this is going on? Or,
well, they didn't know because I wasn't investigated by the FBI.
So it was just the Attorney General's office.
Yeah. And
okay.
And then what happened was the prosecution and the Attorney General, or the U.S. Attorney, came in and made them all sign like non-disclosure and non-contact. So they weren't even allowed to have contact with me. And granted, some of them would sneak up in the middle of the night to talk to me. But
wow.
As far as people are always like, well, where was your support? Why did they, why weren't they backing you up? because the reality is the FBI is like any other private business, and people cover their own butt first. So when I went down and they knew that I had dirt on everybody,
Mm-hmm.
I could have taken all of them and just brought them all down into the toilet with me, just based on what I knew they had done in their own careers.
Yeah.
And I didn't, but I imagine that the pucker factor for them was pretty high when I got arrested.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, and you look at what's going on today, um, with it really did shock me. And when Melania Trump complained about her closet getting raided, and I thought, that happens to everybody. People were
Right,
shocked.
right.
And I thought, well, now they're just seeing it but that is the protocol of what happens to everybody who gets raided. It is the same exact way.
And or the idea of when politicians like and not to get political on one side or the other,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who visited the prisons and came out and said, "Oh my God, they're horrible. These people are in a room by themselves, and there's a toilet, and there's another person in the cell, and they have to go to the bathroom in front of people." Well, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, we've all been there.
yeah.
Like that's how it is in federal prison. You got a stainless steel toilet. It's 2.5 feet from your bed. Your
Yeah, because you were in
bunkies,
an FCI. That's right.
your bunkies. Well, I also went through diesel therapy, which
Oh, they did. Oh,
they
explain diesel therapy, because
sure.
this is
So
another thing that just infuriates
diesel therapy is a term, a slang term for when the prosecution or the government wants to move you around a lot just to break you. It's a technique just to you know get you to cooperate perhaps, or get you to change your plea, to stop fighting your case. And what they'll do is they'll throw you on Con Air, which is the airplane that takes inmates around the country, and they'll throw you on buses. Now you're in shackles, you're in chains. You'll go for 7, 8 hour bus rides.
and
You'll
it's
go
with
to,
female and males.
yeah, definitely. Oh, definitely. Like Con Air. Um, there were, the planes were, 737s or 747s, and they were packed. And the front of the plane was all females, and the back was all males.
What
So,
if you had to go to the bathroom while you were on the plane?
so what happens is you would, there were certain times where they would go down the rows, almost like stewards or stewardesses, and you'd have an opportunity to go to the bathroom. But if you had an issue, like one woman had a colostomy bag and she needed to empty it, they wouldn't let her. So it just poured all over the person herself and the person she was sitting next to. And what what you find is the people that are incarcerated, the people that are in chains, they'll help each other because you're all suffering so much
Yeah,
that the only way to really get through it is to bond. And if you
correct.
don't bond and you try to do it on your own, you're not going to make it, most likely. You're not going to
Right.
make it.
And I mean, and you're in this facilities for 9 years. You're bonding with people, and then you're ready to go home.
Mm-hmm.
So your transition did you go to halfway house or just directly to home confinement?
Well, actually, I had a public safety factor for greater severity on me because of my training. Basically, what they said was because I was trained, they treated me like I was Jason Bourne. They
Oh,
were never going to let me go to a camp because I could escape or I could
yeah,
kidnap people. And I wrote my judge and I said, it's not fair that they're using kidnapping against me when that was my job. to drive up in a van and throw somebody in, throw a hood on them and drive away. Like those things weren't done criminally. They were done for my employment, for the United States government.
Right.
And the judge wrote the BOP and said, yeah, you can't do this to this guy. And then a week later, I was at a camp in New Jersey.
Okay.
So
So you went to the camp, then you went to home confinement.
I went to the camp, and then I get out on the CARES Act.
Okay.
And I'm on home confinement now.
You're currently on. So tell us about home confinement. So you're on home confinement and you're free, right? You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, sure. Home confinement.
Yeah. Tell people what
first of all,
prison
is. What people don't realize about prison, like you said, you forge relationships. If you remember going to a pet store when you're young, and there's a fish tank, and there's all the neon tetras swimming around, and they're all getting along, and all of a sudden the net comes down, and two of them are gone. That's prison.
Yeah.
You can have a friend, and all of a sudden they'll say, all right, roll up. And you'll never see that person again. You don't know where they're going. You don't know what happens to them, and they're just gone out of your life.
Mm-hmm. So, and then you come home and you're not allowed to associate with another felon.
Right.
Without permission.
So then, well, actually, just to clarify on that point, you're not allowed to associate with another felon as far as a business opportunity that looks like it might be illegal.
Yeah, but that's not how it reads. That's how it legally is. However, it's a standard condition of release that, and the actual terminology of it is, you may not associate with another known felon to your knowledge, which scares people because they don't know that in reality it's in a business.
Right, in a illegal enterprise.
Right. And many people, Bob, when I tell you, many people, we have women that come home that are denied to come to a support group because there are women with felonies in the support group, because even the probation officers don't understand. No,
and the vagueness of the rule is used as another, investigative technique to intimidate people.
Yeah. So how do you feel now that you're on home confinement?
Home confinement is, for me, I'm home. I've gotten to see our son play high school football. I've gotten to go through the recruiting process with him. He gets recruited to go to college. I was able to drop him off, pick him up. Our daughter is a senior. I had the opportunity to, share things with her, drop her off. And for me, that was a huge deal because, like, take our daughter, for example. She's an excellent student. She holds the record for saves as a lacrosse goalie, a female lacrosse goalie in New York State, like for a career. I never got to see her make one save.
Wow.
So to come home and to share that her name is in the record book, to talk about games, that was the only, opportunity. I'm getting goosebumps, excuse me. That was the only opportunity that I had to be able to I guess relive, what she had experienced while I was incarcerated. Although I saw them on visits, half the visit is catching up on things, and the other half is just, are we going home now with children? Yeah,
because I think too, there's a culture inside of prison and you become part of that culture and part of that way of living. And I remember getting visits and my mind was not 100% there on the visit because you have to stop yourself from that feeling of complete when they leave. And you can't do prison with 1 foot out and 1 foot in. You have to bring your whole soul and body in order to get through it. And I think coming home is when you realize the ramifications of family, because they are too silent victims and of our situations. And they go through things in a very different way because their life does go on, but your life isn't. So now you have changed. You've come home. You're different. You're on home confinement. Your family has not. How is that interaction for you? I've talked to so many people about this. It's fascinating.
Just to be completely honest and humble, I came home institutionalized. And in the beginning, it caused some serious problems between myself and my son. You learn certain things in prison to survive, and they just don't blend well with society. Something as simple as we're sitting at the kitchen table and he reaches across my plate to get a bottle of ketchup.
Mhm.
In prison, you're having a fight over that.
Yeah.
Other times, he was older now. He was an older teenager, and rightfully so, he would speak his mind. There were a couple times where I handled it like I would have had to handle it incarcerated, and it took me a couple seconds too long, to be honest, to realize that this was my son and I love him. And I was in his face and I was ready to, move furniture, so to speak, before I had to, take a step back and say, what am I doing? I'm not in prison anymore,
Right.
and people don't understand, especially myself in law enforcement. I never understood how you have to change in order to survive. And 15-minute phone calls, so that people know that's your limit for a phone call, is 15 minutes and then it gets disconnected. 15-minute phone calls end up being me,
Yeah.
because you don't have enough time, and all you have is yourself, and all you have are your thoughts. So when you get on that phone with your spouse, your loved one, your relative, all you're doing is shooting requests at them. Oh, I need you to do this. You have to do that. I need you to do this. I need money on my books. I need money in my books. Money, money, money. And it becomes solely a selfish,
Wow.
phone call.
And
And
it's not even a private phone call.
no,
Every 3 minutes, a recording breaks in and
right.
says, you are on a phone call with the federal prison. So the people on the other end are reminded that you're in federal prison.
And
Wow.
and that really hurt my children. You know, they tried to make it funny. They called that woman Barbara,
I had a name for her.
and they had a name for her. And my son, when I came home, he can mimic her perfectly. And he would do it whenever I got on the cell phone. So, they found humor in it, but I know that
Of
when
course.
they were talking to me about life and things that they were going through, and you're trying to be a parent on the phone, you're trying to show them that you love them while you're on the phone, and that recording cuts in, it's just a stab in your heart, because it's reminding them that no matter how hard you try to be the parent they expect, you're not.
Yeah.
And you're not because of the mistake you made, and they're suffering for it more than you are.
Yeah.
The people on the outside, I don't mean to get upset.
No, no.
The people on the outside are in prison more than you are,
Yeah.
because of what you've done. You know, even if I didn't commit the offense, there was a moment when my wife looked at me and said, this guy doesn't sound kosher anymore. You should dump him. And because at that time I was the big tough FBI agent, the greatest one in the world, I basically told her, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm superstar.
Yeah.
If I had listened to her, I would have never been incarcerated.
Yeah.
That's where I lost my moral compass, because I didn't listen to the woman that I love, my partner for forever. And she was absolutely right. But because I was so self involved, and such an egomaniac that it hurt me. When I was in and I would talk to men about this, and I taught a class and I called it CPR.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to bring yourself back to life before you went back into society. And CPR, and I had it stand for consistent, persistent, and resistant. I explained that in order to make it when you go home, you have to be consistent. And I told them, chop wood, carry water. Chop wood, carry water. You have to do the same thing every day, get into a normal world routine so you can fit back into society. And then persistent, I would tell them, you're going to hit walls over and over. People aren't going to accept you like you think. Be persistent. And I would explain to them, the problem with a lot of people is when they get into hell, they burn.
Yeah.
And I would tell them, when you're walking through hell, keep walking. Keep walking and you'll get through it. And then resistant, I would explain to them, the reason that a lot of us were incarcerated was because of our egos. Our egos ate our souls. And inmates need a healing of the soul before they can go back out there. And our ego does such damage to our soul that we forget who we really are. So I would tell them, you have to resist your ego again, the ego that made you sell drugs, the ego that made you think you could get away with this, the ego that made you feel like you were above the law. And if you can resist your ego and all that temptation, then the CPR fits together and you'll come back to life.
That's so true. It really, and that brings me into an interesting question is, when you were working with the FBI and you had a very involved case that was a long period of time, did they just move you from case to case, or did you do a slight debriefing before you went on to something else?
In the counterintelligence world, you make your own cases when you're a good agent.
Okay.
You go out and you recruit a spy from another country and you flip him, meaning you make him work for the US government while he's still working for his government.
Okay.
So you can collect all the secrets that they have. Those cases can go on for a long time.
So when is there a time, it's funny because we do all watch these crazy movies, but for an example, Donnie Brasco, he's in there, he's undercover, and then he's got to be debriefed. He's got to have a time before he goes back to his family. Is that something that's a reality with the Bureau of Investigations? And the reason I ask that is because when you're incarcerated, there is no debriefing.
Right.
You are institutionalized and thrown back out into your old life, but it's not your old life. So oftentimes it's a setup for failure versus a setup for success.
When you have a major case and the major case is ended, you're not pushed to step right into another major case. On your point, the craziest thing that I saw in the transition from a medium to a low to a camp is everything was backwards as far as rehabilitation.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is you should be learning how to deal in society while you're at a camp.
Correct.
You should be getting your driver's license, your social security card. You should be going over things like, well, if your license is suspended, you have to go to DMV, or, let's have an interview. Let's do your resume. Get you ready.
What does life look like for you when you walk outside these doors?
This is what's going on out there right now.
Correct.
This is what you have to be ready for. Let's have people come in and you'll meet people so you can learn how to go through that whole process again. All those classes were at the low. or at the medium where it does you no good.
Mhm.
Like learning how to get your driver's license when you're at a low and you have 9 years left
Yeah.
is
What's the
ridiculous.
point?
Right.
What's the point? And at the camp, they're learning how to buy a house when that's not even a
Right.
possibility.
Right.
Or knitting, or things that
I took
just are
Viking history.
recreational. Excuse me?
At our camp, we had the instructors were inmates, and
Yeah.
whatever you knew, you could teach. I took classes, intro to scuba diving, Viking history. Like I'll never forget me and one of my friends. He's an African American, and we're sitting there at intro to scuba diving, and I'm like, "What do you think of this?" He's like, "I don't even know how to swim." He's like, "I grew up in the inner city of Baltimore." He's like, only time I ever stepped in water was a shower. And, we're getting credit so we can go home early
Yeah.
based on programming that's worthless. It's totally
Absolutely.
worthless.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with you. There is no rehabilitation.
No,
And I'm curious, you were there for what, 9 years, you said?
I was at the low for maybe 6.5, and then I went to the camp.
Okay, so you're home now. At the camp, did they say to you, do you have identification? Because you need your social security card, you need your birth certificate, you need your license, you need a bank account, you
Right,
need these things, and you come home with nothing. And on home confinement, you have to schedule time. No one can schedule an hour to go to Social Security.
right.
If you're not back in time and you get a phone call, you have this fear that you're going back if you don't follow the rules.
Oh,
So
this is definitely true. To answer the question about home confinement that you had asked prior before I started rambling, um, home confinement is like, when you are going for a walk in your neighborhood and you see that golden retriever on the lawn and he runs up to you, but he doesn't go so far because there's the little white flags in the lawn
yeah,
and he has that collar on. That's home confinement.
yeah.
Like you're quote unquote free, but it's almost sometimes harder because it's like being in a candy store and you don't have any money.
Yes. And it is very daunting. I know a lot of women who did get sent back. One woman took her dog for a walk and she was on the sidewalk, couldn't be on the sidewalk, and got sent back. Another woman took a migraine medication, however, and it was prescribed to her by her doctor. However, it wasn't. Home confinement is supposed to be similar. You're supposed to treat it like you are still incarcerated.
Right.
So you're still incarcerated, you're at home, and you have your medications that are prescribed by your doctor, but you can't take them. Because
Right.
if you do, when you do a test, a urine test, and if that's comes back, you're going back. It's very, I think people think it's a cakewalk, which
Oh,
frustrated me during COVID. One of the celebrities, Ellen, in Mega Mansion, sat there and said, now I know what people feel like when they're on home confinement from prison. And it infuriated me
right.
because it's not a cakewalk. A camp, just like a camp is not club fed,
Right.
home confinement is not, you're free.
Just so people understand what home confinement is.
Thank you.
So once a week, I have to go down to the Bronx and I have to do a pee test. I have to do a breathalyzer, and then every other week, twice a week, I have to go down and I have to meet with my counselor, and then the other time I have to do a pee test.
What are the
So
P tests for, if you don't mind me asking?
it's a 9-panel drug test.
Did you have any kind of drugs in your case? Was there any?
No,
So they do it for what?
everybody has to do it. On home confinement, you're not allowed to, be doing any kind of illicit, illegal
Right,
drug.
right, right.
I know a guy who was sent back because his grandmother made him breakfast and it had poppy seeds in the bagel.
Yeah.
and he hit for that. He went
Opiates.
back.
Yeah.
He fought it. It took him 6 months. He got released, but he fought. He had to fight it from the inside.
Yeah.
Like
That's
it
hard.
isn't. It isn't like they say, "Well, let's clear it up." They lock you up, and then you get to clear it up. Which, if anybody's been incarcerated, you know how hard that is,
Yeah.
just to get in touch with an attorney.
Yeah.
Home confinement is knowing you have to know your life 10 days in advance because you have to request it from your case manager. My niece has a recital. I find out about it, on Wednesday. It's the following Tuesday. I can't go. I don't have enough time to put in for it. Everything has to be planned. I mean, everything. There's rules to everything.
Do you have an ankle bracelet on?
Right now, I do.
You.
I didn't.
So what is the purpose of having, they can track you, they know where you are at all times. So why not let you go enjoy your family?
Right. It's exactly right. If I can't even go to my mother's house because the U.S. Marshals or the BOP has to go to her house and search it and okay it before I'm allowed to go there. My father passed away,
Oh,
and
fine.
he has he had a rifle from the Hatfield and McCoy feud, and it's in my mother's house. In order for me to go there, she has to get rid of that.
Yeah. And that's tough too. As an FBI agent, you were used to using your
Oh,
gun, and now you can never, the rest of your life, have a
right,
firearm.
right. And it's not even that. I have to be so aware of who might have one before I go anywhere.
Yeah.
And you have to walk up to your friend's house, knock on the door, and say, before I come in here, are there any firearms? Are there any illicit drugs? Even though marijuana is, legal, you don't have a bong, do you? Or, a pot pipe or anything like that, do you? Because if you do, I can't come in. So it makes like
Yeah.
re-entry into socialization like almost nearly impossible. And the whole goal of rehabilitation is to, you have to be able to assimilate back into society. So what's the number one skill that they teach men? Oh, get your CDL license. So
Women too.
you can get in a cab of a truck and drive across country alone. Like that's assimilation?
Yeah.
No, that's isolation. And that's what they consider like, oh, this is the greatest job you can get. Get in a truck, drive by yourself for the rest of your life, and then die. And it's crazy.
So what does your future look like after you're done with home confinement? Then what happens?
I don't know.
Do you have probation?
Yeah, I have 3 years probation.
Okay.
They say that federal probation. Oh, it's not that bad. But
Depends on your probation officer. It
right,
varies. I have
right,
some women that I work with, their probation officers are wonderful. I have to say mine was wonderful. She was caring. She cared that I had 3 kids. There's a woman I'm working with now that her probation officer won't let her go to Pennsylvania to visit her mother who's very sick because she's not allowed to leave the state without, and the probation officer has 100% ability to allow her to do that.
right.
But he decides, no, you're not going. And that's just the way. So you're still now transitioning to a different set of rules. So you had this set of rules in the FCI, you made it to your camp. You had a different set of rules in the camp. You made it to home confinement with a whole new set of more strict rules. Now you're facing 3 years probation with another completely set of rules with a different person all along overseeing you like you are a child. And then you get off probation and you're free. Do you have restitution?
No,
You're very lucky.
I have no restitution, no fines, or no victims.
Very, very, very
Yeah,
lucky. Because if you had restitution, you then for the next 20 years of your life have to submit a financial affidavit to the financial litigation unit of every single thing you purchase, you spend, you make. I recently just got subpoenaed from financial litigation because they want me to fill out financials. And I said to them, I'm not filling them out. I will happily give you whatever you'd like. I went to prison because I overstated my income. I lied on my mortgage application. I will never fill out another application or government form ever. I'm struggling with that. I work, with my therapist with that. However, now I have been subpoenaed and I've been home 8 years. I've never missed a restitution payment. And now I have to go back into a court to explain my income. And because if my income is a little higher than they want it to be, they will up my restitution. And I don't have a problem with them having anything, but I know women, especially now in this time now, I think about 15 people have gotten subpoenaed in the last few months from Colorado down to Maine, and they're subpoenaing spouses. And so it's a life sentence for somebody with a large restitution. I'm not saying that's bad or good. It wouldn't be bad if I could pay the court-ordered restitution, which I do, and then I pay it every month. And leave me alone. But no, that's not the case. It's now a civil case looming over my head.
and the irony is that the federal government's self-insured. So if you don't pay your restitution, the FDIC will pay it for you.
Yeah, and in my case, my ex-husband refinanced the house because I took a mortgage on our own house, and he refinanced it so Wells Fargo was paid off. So I was recently told, I sent them the receipt, they were paid off, and they said, oh no, I'm sorry, you still owe that. I said, well, they're paid off, that comes off. And they said, no, that was from a civil case. They sued your ex-husband. However, they did not dismiss your criminal case. And from your criminal case, it now becomes a civil case too, and you aren't dismissed with that. And
So
common sense to me is they got paid. Does it matter if I paid them or they were paid by other means? They got paid. So now I could still have to pay them. It's $315,000, so they get paid twice. And they got bailed out by the government, and they are FDIC insured. So it's shocking to me, the inconsistencies. And what I try and educate the communities on is, I hear often, well, you do the crime, you got to do the time. The judge did not give me a life sentence, but financial litigation decided they're going to. And that's not okay. So I'm so happy for you that you don't have that looming over your head. So when you're done with probation, you are done.
I am done. A point to make with what you said is, like, the court system, they don't have the time to evaluate us as individuals. Mm-hmm. They don't look at us as individuals and say, okay, well, this person can do this person can do that. I've heard of people that owed restitution that had accidents at work and couldn't work anymore, couldn't pay the restitution, and they got in trouble for it. Like, they're injured.
Yeah. And, even if they're over 62 and they're on Social Security, they take 15% of Social Security.
Right. Yeah. So, when I talk about, like, how do we change all this? People all these groups talk about prison reform. And to me, prison reform is just, painting a hallway in a prison, giving people more books, making the food better. That's like what they consider prison reform. We need, like, change.
Yeah, I believe it's system reform.
Right.
And it's prison system reform, not so much criminal justice reform, because there's no justice in criminal justice.
No.
I do believe there needs to be, the Bureau of Prisons needs to be accountable for releasing people into communities so they don't come back. And they're not doing a good enough job for that. And employment, for an example, Bob, I'm curious, when you're done, are you going to work? Can you get a job?
Well, I have a specific skill set. Um, so it's hard to get a job in that arena anyways. I'm lucky enough to be retired and have my pension, which, people, if they look at my case and if I'm supposed to have done this heinous
How do they
thing,
give you pension?
how do I still have my pension?
Yeah.
And it never dawns on people like to look at it that way because they only want to believe what they read in the paper. And the
Correct.
prosecutor can say whatever they want and then go, oh, sorry. But if we make statements that are true, it's another charge. So, that I'm not even going to get into that. So, one of the things that like worries me is take like Geo Group, which is like all the halfway houses now,
Yeah.
right? So 92% of Geo Group is owned by Vanguard.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So Vanguard trades on the stock exchange, and it's one of the biggest investments in FERS, which is Federal Employment Retirement Service. So think about this. I'm an FBI agent.
Mm-hmm.
My retirement can increase based on an increase in the number of incarcerated individuals, because the more Geo Group has success, the more valuable the Vanguard stock, the better my retirement.
Wow.
No one looks at it like through that. And I believe that we need a moratorium on prisons. These private prisons, other prisons where like celebrities are members, are owners, part owners, sneaky owners, judges are involved in them. Look, inmates go into these prisons. It's like a snake.
Yeah.
If we cut the head of the snake off, we don't have to feed it anymore. So if we can stop building prisons, then we don't need to fill them as much. And we need decarceration rather than incarceration. We need to find ways to fix unnecessarily long sentences and come up with sentence reform so that it's even across the board, it's not racially motivated, and these sentences can't exceed the charge sentence. You should not be punished in the United States of America with your right to go to trial and then have it doubled because you did so.
Oh yeah, because it's the trial tax. I mean, I've known so many women that truly believe they've done nothing wrong and have gone to trial, and they've gotten, instead of a year, 6 years. And that's absolutely the truth. I mean, it's so there's so many people that are innocent that plead guilty, and people say, well, you pled guilty, but you plead guilty because you have no choice. It's the
Right.
government, and they win what, 99% of their cases.
Yeah, and what they tell you is we win 99% of our cases. Yeah. And here's what we're going to do for you. You go to trial on a 0 to 5 year charge and lose, because you're going to lose. And We have the courtroom even set up so that if you go into a federal courtroom and you look at the juror's box, right across from it on the wall is always the seal of the United States of America. They build courtrooms like that purposely. There's a reason.
Sure.
There's a reason why the judge sits up high. It's all set up for psychological reasons. So you go 0 to 5 years and you fight your case, but you lose, and you get 8 to 10 years. How does that happen? How are you punished for your right as a United States citizen? It's insanity.
Yeah.
We need decarceration. We need excarceration. We need to come up with we need to create alternative ways rather than send people to prison. You know, you look at like state crimes. Most of your state crimes are involve people that have drug addiction, mental health issues. If we took someone who committed a drug crime because they were a drug addict and we sent them to a facility where they could, deal with that issue that they have, that addiction, rather than throwing them into a prison where we've all seen it, the guy's laying on the floor of the bathroom puking and pooping himself, and nobody's helping him, and
And I think for me, it's more about the reentry because of the throwing people in prison with mental health issues and so forth. And then they're throwing them back out to society. Well, if there was better placement with transitional housing, with home confinement, with mental health providers versus, I don't believe that federal prison camps should even exist. If you have a low enough point level to be at a prison camp, I believe that you have enough to be on home confinement. And it's been proven with COVID.
CARES Act proved it.
CARES Act proved it. These people that they sent home on, thousands and thousands of people on home confinement, they did so well. They thrived. And
less than 1%, less than 1% violated.
Yeah. And I would love if everybody who's listening, and I'm going to do a little plug only because I saw it yesterday. There's a movie out on Amazon called Home Free. It's with John Legend, and he interviewed 3 people who have been incarcerated, and they're home now. And I really wish the people in the community who have not been incarcerated watch this. It's only 30 minutes long to watch this, because the feelings you get from these 3 individuals, the woman that is that he interviews said, when you're going through prison, every correctional officer tells you, keep your head down, keep your head down, keep your head down, stay out of trouble. You're in a different culture. Then when you're ready to go home, they say, just go home and keep your head down. And the probation officer said, just keep your head down and keep moving forward. She said, before I realized I was keeping my head down and I wasn't living. All I did was walk around and I felt so bad about myself that my head was down. And it made such an impact on me. And I thought, this poor woman, and I get it. I don't know what her crime was. Don't know if she should have been in prison. But regardless, she did her time and she is now home. But she's still being told to put your head down and don't live. And she shows the frustration in her face, in her heart. And it's a must-see for anybody who especially has not been through this typical thing, because when people come home, it is the hardest part of going through the criminal legal system, in my opinion, because I work with women from the very beginning straight through to when they're incarcerated. I stay with them through incarceration, and then when they come home, and they all say, oh, finally, I'm getting this over with, and then they come home and think they're free. Freedom isn't when you come home because you're a different person. I mean, I've been home 8 years and I can't go into a grocery store. I think I told you that before. I go into a grocery store and I'm so overwhelmed because I can't make choices. And I hear keys. If I hear a bunch of keys jingling, I immediately am like freaked out, you know.
It's funny you say that. When the first time I went into a grocery store with my wife, which I had to request to get a pass in order to go 2 hours, it opened up in the produce section and it was so colorful to me that I started to cry, because one thing that you don't realize until you're incarcerated is prisons, there's no color. It's all dull. Everything's like
Great.
dulled down. And when you walk into a place and there's peppers, onions, bananas, whatever it could be, and it's all bright yellow, green,
Oranges,
red,
yeah.
orange, it's like a shock. It's like a total shock. And I remember that I sat down and I was like, is my life now going to be, I'm overwhelmed by things that I took for granted? You know, like going to a grocery store in the produce section, you know, I took that for granted. Now it's something that almost makes me like stagger, and I have to fight thinking about what I didn't have. There were there's some things that have happened since I've been home that are comical. For example, my first week back, it was Thursday night, and my wife cooked chicken on the bone. And for listeners that don't realize this, the federal food menu is consistent throughout the entire United States. So, like on Friday for lunch, you're going to get a fish patty, and
I
you're
was
going to
just
get
gonna say,
pasta at night. And you
Wednesday's
know,
tacos.
yeah, and you know, you get a cheeseburger Wednesday afternoon, and you can tell, you know, what everybody in the entire prison system's eating during any given meal. And the fact that my wife gave us hot dogs one day and chicken on the bone the same other day, it was like she was following the federal meal plan. And I looked at her, I was like, are you doing this as a joke? And she had no idea what I was talking about. And then another time, I walked into the bedroom and there were 2 rolls of toilet paper on the bed. And I was like, I freaked out. And to the listeners that don't know this one, when the orderly comes around, for the week, they'll put your toilet paper on your bed, and you'll come back to your bed and there'll be like 2 rolls sitting there, and that's what you get for the week. And it was like my wife knew that, and she was just like teasing me, but it was all a coincidence, and it was just comical because I was like, toilet paper on the bed. And then when I first got home around 4 o'clock every day, I was antsy, and she was like,
Count.
why do you stand by the window every day at 4 o'clock? And I was like, do I? She's like, yeah, like you don't realize it. And I was standing up for count.
Yeah.
People don't understand it. You get counted and you have to stand by your bunk or in your cell, and it's the same time every day, year after year, day after day, month after month. And when you get home, your body's so used to that. Around that count time, you like start to get like jittery.
Even in
And
visiting, here you are visiting with your loved ones, and the guards come in to count you, and you have to stand, and you're humiliated in front of your children
right.
as they walk around and count you. And you can't even get this 3 hour time, 4 hour time with your family without there being a count in between. And it was the most humiliating thing for, I don't know for dads, but for a mom to have my son and 2 daughters watch their mother get counted. And it is just a demeaning, anything to demean and take away your, I guess, self, take away anything that you could enjoy is really how the system works. right now.
And also for the visitor themselves, you
Yeah.
know, you having to go through a search or having, you know, to sit in a situation where something might occur in front of them and like the whole place has to go on lockdown and they have to leave immediately. Like if a fight breaks out in the visiting room or
Yeah.
somebody tried to smuggle something in and they catch it. It's traumatizing every time somebody comes to visit. You know, if you're not ready for it, you know, psychologically, it can be really damaging.
Yeah.
And, you know, they don't tell you what to expect. They just say, take your jacket off, can't wear a wire bra, no heeled shoes, no, you know, it's like all these rules that, you know, when I was at Danbury, my mother came to visit with my wife, and she violated every clothing rule there was. I mean, she had to go to like Kohl's and like Walmart like 5 times. She kept coming back. They're like, nope, nope, nope. She go back again. Nope, nope, nope. Finally, she was like, why don't you come with me and buy the stuff for me? And I mean, it was
Oh.
crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, because they're older. Well, I have the very last, and I ask this to every guest who has been in the system. Do you feel like you're a better person today?
I am a much better person today.
So, if you were to face your judge today, and she said, "See, Bob, I sent you to prison, and you're a better person today. Prison worked." What would you say? And I say this because someone asked me, and I was, what would you say to her?
I would say you're absolutely right. Prison did work, but it worked the way you wanted it to. I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. If if an unmarked police car is on the street, I panic. If I go out on a pass and we hit traffic, even though I have an hour left, I panicked and I'm going to go back to prison. Um, I'm damaged. I'm damaged for life, and it's because of the sentence that you gave me, Your Honor. We could have figured out a different way to work this out where I could help people, but now I have to ask approval just to do volunteer work, and I get denied. So, although I am a better person because I'm humbled and I've met people that have had a positive impact on my life, and they were also fellow inmates. As far as what you've done to me and what you've done to my fellow inmates, you've helped destroy us. And a lot of people will not come back from it and will have PTSD for the rest of their lives and might fall into substance abuse or might end up going back into prison because they don't know any better. And that's because of the sentence that you gave us. So you did you did change my life, but you didn't necessarily change it for the good.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And I think that prison doesn't make people a better people. I really believe it's the people you meet in prison
I agree.
that make you a better people, because I met women that were amazing people that I would have never met if I hadn't been there. And together, we made each other's lives better. And we still today do, with support groups and moving forward. And the prison system is definitely.
And before we go, I'd just like to, thank you for everything that you do. Um, you know, my
How can people
father,
get in touch with you, Bob, if they have a question? Can they
sure,
get?
they can get my email. My email is stonecrossings@gmail.com. They could reach out to you and you give them my phone number if they want. I'll gladly talk to anybody about anything. If I could help anybody, I would love to. And what I was saying was my dad had always said that, you don't judge the success of a person's life by how much money they touch. It's by how many lives they touch. So for you and the people that you work with, you're all hugely successful because I see the people that you help. And, I feel like as like an inmate, I want to thank you for everything that you do and for
Thank you.
giving me the opportunity for speaking.
Thank you. And stop calling yourself an inmate.
Oh.
Well,
See, you got to change that thinking. And it is, we call ourselves these labels now: felon, criminal, inmate, offender. And those labels are part of the whole system continuing to come down and down and down. You are going to be an incredible, you're successful already. Being transparent 100% is successful. And you've yourself helped so many people, as I know. And I know, and I think people will see you and I have some great things coming up,
amen.
working together. So hopefully you'll be back, and
Gladly.
we'll do a lot together. So I really do appreciate you being transparent and vulnerable.
Sure.
So,
And if anybody has questions, just reach out to me. I'll answer any question.
great. And as usual, you can always reach Criminal Justice Cafe at criminaljusticcafe@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all of the YouTube. We have, our podcast is broadcast on every platform. So please do follow us. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful day.